Hi, Kate, and thank you for accepting do this podcast episode. So today we're gonna, start with your adventure from the United States to Spain with your family, not alone,
Yes.
which is way harder when you have
Yeah.
two kids in the mix. So how did you get there? What happened? Was it something that you wanted to do for a long time, or your husband got a job or you got a job and everything changed? How did it happen?
Well, thank you so much for this opportunity, Jessica. I'm really excited to talk about this with you. I would necessarily use our experience as like a template for everyone else because it was a little bit crazy. Basically, my dad and his family are Spanish, and so as a child, I always had an interest in Spain and Spanish culture. But
Mm,
with both of my parents were actually immigrants, and mostly their focus was on integration in the US. And so I didn't grow up speaking Spanish at all, even though I had quite an interest in it. I could understand more than I could speak, but speaking, I could maybe say "Hola, cómo estás?" Like just nothing.
the basics.
And so, like when my husband and I had children, my husband is Venezuelan, and
Mhm,
so he spoke Spanish, and Spanish was definitely something that was a priority to us.
mhm,
Um, and in the back of my mind, I had this idea that one of my friends when I was a kid had gone and done school abroad, like in elementary school, and came back speaking another language. And I was like, that's really cool. And I remember thinking, like, I'm going to do that for my kids one day. So my husband and I, we started talking about the potential of putting our kids in school abroad and moving for a year or a semester or something so they could pick up some more Spanish.
mhm.
Um, and eventually it like just happened. We basically right after COVID was about the time when my daughter was going to start preschool, and we had been quite isolated during COVID, and so we actually didn't have much of a support system in the US. We
Mm,
weren't close to family. My husband was working as a nurse in a COVID unit at that time. And so we were very, very isolated
yeah.
from most people since we were fairly highly exposed. So it's not like we were super connected to the area we were at.
Mhm,
And with both of us having very international families, the idea of moving wasn't crazy
mhm.
as much as it might be for someone else.
Yeah, yeah.
um, and so basically, we didn't have any jobs lined up in Spain or anything like that, but I had been starting to get into maybe doing some freelance stuff, but I didn't have, I was mostly managing the kids on my own at that point, and so it was hard to do much more than that.
Yeah.
And my husband had um, just been accepted into a remote branch of a case management
Oh,
position.
okay.
So he was looking like he was going to have some opportunities there. So we were like, why don't we just go for like 3 months was our original plan because you can, as an American, come to Spain for 3 months or 90 days with just a tourist visa. Or
Mhm.
at that point, it was basically nothing.
Yeah.
um, and so we just showed up. I had never been to Spain before. I did not speak Spanish. The
Oh.
kids did not speak Spanish, and we just came and we've never left.
Well, but the good thing is your husband spoke at least some Spanish. He was born in Venezuela, or
Yes, he was born in Venezuela.
but he moved to
Um,
the US quite early.
yeah, like around 5, 6, 5
Oh,
years old. Yeah, so fairly young. So he speaks English fluently, I would say, without an accent.
yeah,
And he's very comfortable in English and but also very comfortable in Spanish because he grew up speaking Spanish at home with his parents.
yeah.
Um, so that was definitely a help. Although just before we came, we'd found a school here to put the kids in for a few months. We had an apartment lined up, and they told my husband, "Well, we're closing the remote branch. You have to come into office." So I ended up coming by myself with the kids
Oh, wow.
right
Oh,
at the start, which I wouldn't recommend. It was a bit crazy. My
it's
sister
a
stayed
lot.
for a little bit to help me. She came out and we did like some just touristy travel things for a little bit. But yeah, right at the start, it was just me and the kids, which was crazy. I
You
I
break.
definitely brave or insane, I don't know. But you know what? It's been like such an experience. It definitely forced me to jump into learning the language right away.
Yeah.
And that's actually how I ended up staying at the start, was just on a student visa. I found some Spanish classes and they
Mm-hmm.
worked out really well for me. We loved the school for the kids. We put them in a private school to start with because it was just easier. The Spanish school system is a bit different.
Okay.
So starting out, we put them in a private school, but it was a trilingual school with Castellano, French, and
Um,
English.
oh, nice.
Yeah. Um, which was a really great start for us.
Yeah.
And yeah, so right at the start, the kids were doing really well in their school, and I was in classes and I was starting to pick up the language. And I've tried learning Spanish many times throughout my life and just been so bad at it, but being forced into that kind of immersion experience, and I had to pick it up. I had to use Google Translate multiple times every day and just speak because I was the responsible adult and there was no one else.
Oh,
um, that just forced me to really learn it. And yeah, I think once we started picking it up and seeing that we were making progress, we really loved what we had found here and didn't want to go. And so we've just been renewing visas and making things work, and um, growing online companies and stuff more and more so that we can have more freedom to, yeah,
move.
it's been
Yeah.
amazing.
No, it's good. It's good. But when you said about the education, it was it the private that it was different. Is it the structure or because
So
the
the way,
immersion? The
go ahead.
I don't think the public system would have like an English teacher. I assume it would be like yeah, you go in, you have to learn Spanish right away for the kids, and probably with the private because it was French,
And Spanish.
and
Yeah.
Spanish and English. Probably, it would be a easier transition for them with
Right. Well, and a big thing was because we originally only planned to come for a few months.
Mm.
Um, as tourists, I don't think we qualified to enter the
Ah,
Spanish school
I see.
system.
Okay.
We had to work on some more documentation before we entered the Spanish school system.
Hmm.
Basically, we're in Barcelona,
Yeah.
and in Barcelona, I think it's maybe different in other areas in Spain, but for sure here in Catalonia, we have several different types of schools. There's the regular public schools, then there's
Mhm.
concertadas, which are like half public, half private. They're like
It's like
partially
how do you say in the United States? Is it cheddar? No, not cheddar. It's a cheese. A
like
cheddar.
charter.
Cheddar. Yeah, that's the one. Is it similar?
Kind, not really charter. It's like um I don't know. It's just partially subsidized by the government.
Okay.
So it's not fully government supported. So
Hmm.
that gives them some more freedoms to teach materials differently than like what the government would say, or like to offer more extracurriculars or things like that. But then students do have to pay, whereas like a public school would be free.
Yeah.
Um, and then with private schools, they're often accredited by their own groups. Like the school that we joined, the trilingual school, is accredited by the French government or whatever, because it's French, Spanish, and English. So they
Mhm.
get their accreditation through the French system. So
Uh,
like
it's
each,
different.
yeah, each.
So it's an international school. It's not. It's a private
Yeah, it's an
international.
international school.
Okay.
A lot of the private schools are international schools.
Yeah.
Um, but it was a very small international school. There were maybe 30 students in the whole school, which my kids were Yes, very small. My kids were 15 months and almost 4 when we came, so quite young.
Yeah. So is that the Montessori school? So
Yeah,
all the kids sort of mixed together. It's not like
yeah,
different classes or well.
yeah. So there's it was a very good way for them to integrate and to meet with other kids. And there were some kids who were local, some kids who were not, and like so many different languages. And so that was really good for my kids coming in. They weren't the only ones like learning the language, and the
Yeah.
teachers were really familiar with, I mean, starting with my son, he wasn't even speaking when we came. So, they're just learning language at all.
Yeah.
um, and so it was a good start for them. And I think my son's age was actually, like, in some ways it was hard because he was so young, but in other ways it was best because my daughter, she just turned 4 when we were here. And she missed California and the US more than I expected.
Yeah.
um and so it was a transition for her, and she's got a strong personality, and there was quite a bit of pushback against learning a new language at first. She would like play with other kids and stuff, but she didn't want to speak in another language. She would only want to speak in English, and that was definitely hard for her. My son, though, from the start has just started speaking English, Spanish, and French, like, just
Oh.
from the start, which has been incredible to see. Sometimes they're all mixed.
Oh yeah. 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 I can't wait.
um,
My daughter's she's how old is she? She's only in 8 months, I think now.
okay.
And she just started daycare, which is French and German. So
Uh-huh.
I'm so excited to hear her talking.
Yeah.
It'll be fine. Yeah.
Yeah. It's been really exciting. He'll be like, he'll, my French is worse than my Spanish. Um, but um, I'm also Canadian, so we have some like
Oh,
French influence on that side. Um,
all over the place.
um,
It's okay. My
yes,
it's
very international. Um, yeah, so just he'll say like a couple words in French and then a whole sentence in Spanish and then end in English. And
Oh,
it's like, so the communication is still growing, but it's exciting to see him picking them all up. I think for my daughter, she picked up Spanish first, and I think that's mostly because we put an emphasis on that. I was speaking with her teachers, and it's like it's a French school, but all the teachers also speak Spanish and English as well, actually. Um, and so we were focusing mostly on Spanish for her at the start, since she was kind of giving some resistance to all of the change, which it's a lot of change for a child, you know, new friends. It was also her very first year in school. We hadn't done any school in the US yet. So lots of changes.
did you do
But
any preparation for like? Did you explain how it would be the school or anything like that?
yeah, I mean, before we moved, we were practicing some letters and things like that, and trying to speak as much Spanish at home as possible, as much as I could. We
Hmm.
were, anytime we watched cartoons or anything, we would put them in Spanish,
Hmm.
listening to Spanish songs and anything like that. But it's very different to have that. Like, it was the first big move of her life, really.
Everything,
um,
everything changed, right? Like
Everything changes, yeah. And a big change for us as
before.
well is we were coming from a rural area in
Uh,
California
okay.
into Barcelona. Like, so
Mm.
we went from being in a house with a yard to being in an apartment. There are many changes like that that were quite significant for our family as well.
Yeah, yeah, I can see. But was she going to daycare before you guys moved?
No.
No. So it was a a huge
It was a very big
yeah.
change.
Because sometimes she's used to the hours or staying at least separate from the parents.
Yeah, no, she was
It was
just home with me because with COVID, like most things that were accessible we were just in our own little bubble at home most of
yeah,
the time for a good part of her life. So it was a change that would have needed to happen, whether we stayed in the US or we were somewhere else, but it was just exponentially larger with language and culture and everything included. But
Yeah.
overall, now, I mean, we're very happy here. The kids have friends. Um, the school has ended up being a great network for all of us.
Mhm.
I have made great friends with many of the moms here. And something that was very foundational, I think, for us connecting with the community was that at our particular school, there was a park maybe a block or so away, and most kids after school would go play at the park for an hour or two or whatever with their parents or their nannies. Um, and so there's a couple schools in the area. Many kids would go to this park, and so we would go to the park afterwards and get to mingle with the other kids. Here in Barcelona, another big thing for us has been Catalan, because in Barcelona and Catalonia they speak the local dialect isn't actually Spanish, isn't Castellano, it's Catalan.
Yeah.
Um, and so there was that extra language to pick up on as well. I We don't speak it. I can read it
It's
and
really similar
understand
to
it,
Spanish, right?
but the
My grandma.
pronunciation is
Yeah.
hard for me still.
Yeah.
But it helped us to be exposed to more of that. It helped us to connect with other people in the community, to learn about other schools in the area, different programs for the kids. Meeting at parks was really, really something that helped us a lot at the beginning, I think.
Yeah. And how did the family dynamic change? Like, because I'm not sure if in California you staying with the kids, right? Almost full time job.
Yeah. I have felt so much more support here because now it is different because we were coming out of COVID in California, which was very isolated.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but that being said, here things are very connected, and I've been able to have more time now. The kids are in school. I can work on my networking and my freelance projects and do more things for myself. I have here something that was huge was because I was taking Spanish classes. I got out of my Spanish class maybe 30 minutes after the kids finished their school. So we
Mm-hmm.
found a nanny who speaks only Spanish. um, and we wouldn't have been able to afford a nanny like that in the US. But here, with the lower cost of living, we definitely can. And so we have her, and if I need to have an appointment or something for myself, I've just had so much more support from that. Also just from friends who um a big change for us was because I think we had been so isolated during COVID. When we came here to a big city and there was no restrictions, we were quite sick for a while because our immune system was just like really catching up from no exposure.
Yeah.
But because, I mean, in this kind of very connected cityscape that we have here in Barcelona, where the city's very walkable and everyone lives very close, when if I was sick and I couldn't walk the kids to school, on our same street there were other families walking their kids to the same school. I could, walk them down to the door of our apartment building, and another parent could whisk them off to school, and
Yeah.
we could help each other like that. Or, I could take someone else's kids to the park for a couple hours if they had an appointment. Like there's just this sense of community because everyone is so close and connected. It's been really special. Like I haven't experienced that so easily in the US, where like my best friend who had children in the US was a 30-40 minute drive away.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it was much harder to create community, whereas here it's been so easy to connect with other families and to support each other. And I think that's been really beautiful and really special for us here. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think the culture, it's also, well, every country has a different, every city has a different culture too.
Yeah.
I think like from if you go from Barcelona to any other down below. I can't remember the name. For
Like Valencia or
the
Madrid
Gallego
or
area, that they speak like Gallego. I think is the one near
like,
Portugal, because
yeah,
it's
Galicia.
Portuguese. Yeah, Galicia.
Mhm.
The language is really similar to Portuguese. It is a completely
Mhm.
different culture, like in the same country. And
Yeah,
I think in the US, it's like people, like someone from California to Texas, it's completely different.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Very regional.
Yeah, but I think the Spanish culture, it's really about family and being together, similar to probably what Portugal and Italy to like they sit for dinner.
Yeah,
It's I think it might be different from the US from what I know from people that are living there.
definitely. If kids are out in public, I feel like so much more than in the US at restaurants with their families and at gatherings. Um, I bring my kids everywhere with me.
Yeah,
um, and yeah, they have gotten used to, in fact, they ask all the time, Mom, we want to go sit on a terrace and have dinner or like, things like that. They love this kind of inclusion. And it's been really neat. Just the other week, we were in a plaza having dinner at some little cafeteria, little bar.
yeah,
Um, and the kids were running around and playing and then coming back and going back and forth. And something that I noticed is there were other adults who were also kind of keeping an eye out, and I'm watching my kids and they're within sight, but
hmm,
I was not worried. I had no anxiety. And I was talking to another mom who has actually moved from the US as well, where in the area that I lived before in the US, I would have had so much anxiety having my kids out of reach,
yeah,
like where I couldn't actually physically touch them. But they were playing on the other side of the plaza and I could see and hear them, but like I had no need to be right there on top of them. They were comfortable, they were fine. At one point, I think my son went to go play with some trash and there was another adult like standing there by the trash can and like told him, no, no, don't play with this is dirty. And so he went and kept playing and I didn't even have to go over. Like this kind of community of like kids are just accepted and someone else isn't just gonna let your kid do something gross like pick
yeah,
up a piece of trash. They're gonna see that and they're gonna care and they're gonna say something,
hmm,
but also like not in a rude way, in a very nice way. I
hmm,
It's been very, very neat to see that. It's an experience that I didn't really have before here. um, I do think that, I don't know, the culture here just includes kids, but I also think that kids just get used to the environment because they come along. I feel like when we first got here, my kids were not quite as used to being brought along for things, and the change in timing for like dinner being later or staying up later or different things like that was an adjustment. Um, and I feel like I still haven't figured out the reason why, but I feel like here kids are quieter. Like they just they don't scream as much or yell or like we get too crazy or whatever. Like my kids were very energetic.
yeah.
um,
Oh, I had the same feeling when I went to Japan. My
yeah,
kid was screaming the whole way, and like no kid was even saying a word. I was like, "Oh my
right.
god, this is so embarrassing."
Exactly. I'm like, why are my kids so noisy? And kids here are just very quiet. I don't know if it's like just growing up in apartment living where you're close to other people, whereas before we had our own house or own yard and there was no need to be quiet in the house,
Yeah,
besides my own comfort. um, or like now we use public transportation for everything, which is
yeah,
amazing. We don't have a car here.
yeah,
Um, and I love it that way. And kids now my kids know they'll go find a seat, they'll sit down and be quiet. But like that was completely new, not having to be restrained in a car seat. Like
Yeah.
it was a very exciting and loud and wiggly experience at the start, but now it's like an everyday thing. They go sit down, they look at the cars outside the window of the bus, and that's it. Or like
Yeah.
it, they know where they fit in the fabric of society and the rhythm of day-to-day life. And it's neat because they start participating and start interacting so much earlier here, and it's really good, I think.